I want to welcome all of you from around the country joining us for Oak Ridge Holocaust Remembrance Day. Each year during Holocaust Remembrance Week, the City of Oak Ridge establishes by proclamation our Holocaust Remembrance Day, which coincides with this program. You can find a copy of that proclamation on our Facebook page. This is where I would normally tell you where the emergency exits are if we were in person, but instead I will mention that because we're on Zoom, it is very important to remain muted so that your sound doesn't create any interference. As many of you know, this program was established by Mira Kimmelman, our beloved friend and my lifetime mentor and teacher, and longtime educator about the Holocaust. She told her personal story for years, all over the region, impacting children and adults. She is no longer here to tell her story, but she was very clear in her memoir, Echoes from the Holocaust, that the need for telling the story continues. It's in our hands now. Mira said that if we don't tell it, then the truth will be lost. From the events of recent years, we see how quickly truth can be eclipsed by hatred. For this next hour, we bring the truth about the Holocaust into view. Our remembrance program consists of a candlelighting ceremony, readings, songs, a featured speaker, and prayer. For those of you who have your own candles, we will also be lighting our candles together at the very end of the program. Elie Wiesel said at the opening of Yad Vashem in 2005, "We never try to tell the tale to make people weep. That is too easy. We didn't want pity. If we decided to tell the tale, it is because we want the world to be a better world, just a better world. And learn and remember. What is our role? We must become the messengers." End quote. Mira established and especially appreciated the candlelighting ceremony. And in fact, she wrote a poem about it. I came across it in our files this year. I felt that she had placed it there for me to find, giving me strength to continue this program without her by my side. I will read just a portion of her poem in its original form, written in April of 2001 for the Yom HaShoah program. Tonight we light 6 candles, each one of them representing 1 million Shoah victims. What is 1 million or 2 or 6? Human mind cannot comprehend the vastness of these numbers. Numbers are faceless, numbers have no name, yet we know that all of them had a face and had a name. Tonight we are linked in memory with all victims of the Shoah. We swallow our tears while lighting the candles. May their memory be a blessing forever. By Mira Kimmelman and loving memory of her brother Benno. So now we begin with the candle lighting ceremony.
My name is Abigail Lang and I am lighting a candle for the children, remembering over 1.5 million children under the age of 16 who died in the Holocaust, stripped of their childhoods, their potential forever left unfilled.
We are Robin and Tim Sheik, and we are reading on behalf of the mothers and fathers. Remembering all the parents who perished, who tried to protect their children, so many mothers who went with their children into the gas chambers rather than be separated. I'm Alice Feldman.
And I'm Albert Good. We're lighting this candle, remembering all the sons and daughters who perished. So many never had a chance to say goodbye to their parents. Some spent years after the war searching for lost siblings or a lifetime grieving for them.
My name is Anna Iroff Bailey, and I'm lighting this candle on behalf of the leaders and teachers. Remembering the leaders in the community who were often the first to be murdered. Remembering all the teachers, many of whom continued to teach, even when it was forbidden and punishment meant death.
My name's Peter Blau. Like many of us, I too lost family members in the Holocaust. This candle is now lit for the relatives. Remembering all those extended family relatives who died in the Holocaust, leaving some families without any grandparents, aunts, uncles, or cousins, and some families completely destroyed.
I'm Rebecca Batterina, and I'm lighting this candle on behalf of resistance fighters. Remembering the Jews who fought bravely as partisans in resistance groups that operated under cover of the dense forests of Eastern Europe, the armed and unarmed resistors in the ghettos and camps, and individual acts of defiance that so frequently led to immediate death.
I'm Kay Brookshire, and this is Tom Behan, and we are lighting a candle for the righteous.
Honoring the righteous among the nations, an honor bestowed by the state of Israel to non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews from the Nazis. We also honor all those who stand together against hatred of all kinds.
My name is Steve Reddick, and I'm lighting this Mira candle in honor to honor the legacy and memory of Mira Kimmelman, and to honor all those who have taught and continue to teach about the Holocaust. Remembering Mira, who shared her experiences with so many, Mira says, remember, teach, explain.
Next, I want to introduce Chuck Brodsky. Chuck is a folk singer, a songwriter, and a storyteller. And I met him personally for the first time on Zoom last week, and I immediately sensed that this was someone who was an artist in its truest form. I'm really grateful that he's with us tonight, and he'll be performing 3 of his songs about the Holocaust throughout the program. Coming up first is Warsaw in May, and I will let him tell you about it.
Hi. This song is about the musicians of Auschwitz, and obviously it's a subject that is close to my heart. I want to show you a picture here. That's from within the camp, obviously. And here's another one where they were forced to play in extremely cold weather. So this is called Warsaw in May. Ones were moving east, and we were turned in by a priest, rounded up with all the rest. Cattle cars from there went west. It was my precious violin. When we arrived, it saved my skin. The audition I would pass that day, Wagner I dared not misplay. My violin would save my life, as well my daughter and my wife. They summoned me to come and play. I'd close my eyes and go halfway. They were so merry and so gay, who danced by night and killed by day. They'd give me little scraps of food, sometimes when they were in the mood. I'd draw my bow, and they would sway. They had no orders to obey. The officers, their wives and whores, drinking their cognacs and their liqueurs, that crane their necks, strain their ears. I don't know where they found the tears. Maybe someplace back in Berlin. Sometimes I slip some Mahler in. My violin would play itself while I'd escape to someplace else. My shattered mind would limp away to Warsaw in the month of May, conducting in the concert hall. I would not see the things I saw. I'd hear the woodwinds and the strings. I'd tune out all the other things. I'd draw my bow and they would sway. They had no orders to obey. The officers, their wives and whores, drinking their cognacs and their liqueurs, that crane their necks, strain their ears. I don't know where they found the tears. Maybe someplace back in Berlin. Sometimes I slip some Mahler in. Would start to play at dawn until the work crews had all gone. When they returned, we'd play some more, and in between we did our chores. We weren't there to entertain people stepping off the trains. We played when we were told to play. We'd stop when they would say, go away. I'd draw my bow, and they would sway. They had no orders to obey. The officers, their wives and whores, drinking their cognacs and their liqueurs, that crane their necks, strain their ears. I don't know where they found the tears. Maybe someplace back in Berlin. Sometimes I slipped some Mahler in. Sometimes I slip some Mahler in. Sometimes I slip some Mahler in.
Thank you so much. We're now moving into the part of our program where we share poems, stories, and descriptions about the Holocaust. And today our theme is Through the Eyes of a Child. These readings are written by Jews who grew up with the Holocaust. How did children and teenagers see this much hate and violence directed at them and find a way to process it? What did they emphasize when they expressed it? Some tell it through poetry, some through memoirs. Listen carefully to their words, and you'll hear the impact of their experiences in the voices of our readers.
Our first reading is Holocaust by Barbara Sonic. In this poem, we see how the dreams of a child were destroyed, taken away, only because they were Jews. Their dreams were taken away in the same way that the children were taken away in cattle cars to their deaths. Nathaniel Lang reads this poetry through the point of view of Jewish children.
We played, we laughed, we were loved. We were ripped from the arms of our parents and thrown into the fire. We were nothing more than children. We had a future. We were going to be lawyers, rabbis, wives, teachers, and mothers. We had dreams, then we had no hope. We were taken away in the dead of night like cattle in cars, no air to breathe, smothering, crying, starving, dying. Separated from the world, to be no more. From the ashes, hear our plea. This atrocity to mankind cannot happen again. Remember us, for we were the children whose dreams and lives were stolen away.
Our next reading is Separation by Jeanette Gilbert. This reading is from the perspective of a young child still clinging to her mother and living without her father. Her story starts in her birth country of France, and the effects were life-lasting. Jeanette is a longtime member of our congregation, and she will read her work assisted by Bonnie Carroll.
You can see behind us, that's the village, Bastia, where I was born and raised the first 5 years. And this is an excerpt of an essay that I wrote for a UT journalism class of my experience during World War II as a 5-year-old child. She recalls being abruptly lifted from her bed and placed atop her uncle's shoulders.
Why were the adults talking in such tense, hushed voices?
She sensed naked fear in the air. It was March 1943.
The small Mediterranean island of Corsica, located west of Italy, was on the path of Mussolini's march through parts of Europe. He had signed a pact with Hitler, and French Jews were being rounded up and deported.
There's a nice poem here.
There was talk, lots of ugly, unbelievable rumors. The Toledano family planned to hide in a mountain village and wait out the war. Some neighbors could be trusted, others could not.
They could point and call Juif, Juif, Jews. Who were they? She couldn't understand what the commotion was about. No more questions, her mother warned.
Her mother Esther and older brother Benny locked up at the villa, hurrying the group along. Counting her uncle Eli, the group of 6 included her mother, 18-year-old brother Benny, 8-year-old brother Jacques, and 15-year-old sister Lily.
She had not known her father.
He had read the Nazis' writing on the wall and left for America 3 months after her birth. He would send for the family as soon as he could, her mother told her, over and over again. He could not have predicted how quickly the fear and power of Hitler would paralyze Europe. He would not see his family for the next 8 years. The group began walking toward the small village. Planes were flying overhead. Other running family groups surrounded them. Periodic bombs were bursting nearby. The groups ran for shelter.
She heard loud screams. She saw her mother trip and hide behind a bush. Fear gripped her. When her uncle reassured her that it was safe to continue walking, she demanded her mother, who was running ahead with the older children. She was not to be denied. They were like nomads in the night, seeking shelter in the mountains. The sky was starry beautiful with soft, spooky animal sounds. Their only comfort was each other and the familiarity of their own voices. Surely nature could not be as cruel as man.
She wished her father were here to protect her, move them from this madness. But all she had of him were tales and photos. She imagined him greater than life, like a knight on a white horse. He was a blurry, distant figure who would rescue her from enemy and foe. He would make everything all right. Her mother did not discourage this magic ending, as she too needed to believe things would turn out well.
Both she and her mother leaned heavily on her older brother Benny as father and protector.
The hurried walk continued for a second day on hidden trails. Soon planes were flying and dropping bombs overhead.
From a distance, they were a pitiful sight. A small, proud mother and her brood. Like frightened, hounded deer, they were exposed and vulnerable, not so much to the dark of the night or the wiles of nature, but rather to the dark, evil side of man. Like a protective hen, her mother fussed, hovered, and watched over them. Small of stature, tall in courage, she was alert as a panther, ready to pounce, even kill, to deliver them to safety.
When the family finally reached the rented cottage, they searched for a food source. It felt more physically safe in this remote village where shepherds and farmers tending their herds scratched a meager living from the soil. Could leading a life so close to earth and sky insulate these peasants from strong prejudices? 6 months later, her older brother Benny had a raging fever and was taken to the American hospital filled with wounded soldiers. Typhus fever made him delirious for days on end.
Mother was frantic, never leaving his bedside. She begged and pleaded with the American doctors for help, and they responded. She would always love Americans after that day. Any American, all Americans.
After a month of dark days and darker nights, mother and son returned from the hospital. Though he was ravished and pale, the fever vanished as it appeared, and her mother's heart began to beat once more. 2 years later, she awoke to the sweet smell of hay, wildflowers, and exciting, joyful voices. It was March 1945. The only radio in the village announced the liberation of France by American forces on the shore of Normandy. She did not understand the details.
What mattered was that they would return home to the villa. But more important, her mother said, they were returning together and well. She would hold her uncle's hand and run just like the others.
But it was not the same. Food rationing made life difficult. Her mother's awesome burden grew more noticeable.
They were going to America.
She must learn to speak English, to make new friends, her mother told her. Her father successfully proved to immigration officials that he could provide for his family.
Surely America's streets were lined with gold.
He wanted his children to grow up in a country free of hate and prejudices. She was 8 years old. The family boarded a ship at the port of Marseille and sailed for 17 days until they reached the port of New Orleans, where her father awaited them. It was March 1948.
She had not imagined him so small. She had not imagined him so tender as he lifted her into his arms. The separation had been so long. He was her father, her papa.
She was his younger daughter, Jeanette.
Our next reading is The Creed of a Holocaust Survivor by Alexander Kimmel. In this poem, Alexander Kimmel runs away just 1 month before the ghetto and everyone in it was destroyed. Kimmel's painful memories, including hard labor, did not change his view of humanity. His poem, read by Mark Kay, is one of hope that mankind will choose to stop its senseless hatred and bigotry.
Alexander Kimmel and his family moved to the ghetto of Roatan in 1940 when he was 14. Between 1941 and 1943, 9,900 out of 10,000 Jews were killed in the ghetto. In May 1943, Kimmel ran away and eventually made his way to America. The Creed of a Holocaust Survivor. I do believe with all my heart and the natural goodness of man. Despite the blood and destruction brought by one man trying to be God. In the goodness of man, I do believe. I do believe with all my heart that God gave man the blessing and the curse. Man can select the curse of envy, hatred, and prejudices, or the blessings of love, harmony, and beauty. I do believe with all my heart that God created a beautiful world, the sun and the trees, the flowers and the bees. And the best way to serve God is to enjoy the fruits of his labor of love. Despite the painful memories from the past and joyful celebration of life, I do believe. I believe with all my heart in the love and compassion of the Creator. I do believe. When man will conquer his destructive urge and learn to live in harmony with nature and himself. When man will stop killing man in the name of God, and nation will not lift up weapons against nation. When it will be, I do not know, but despite all signs to the contrary, in the dawn of a better world, I do believe.
Our next reading is Little Polish Boy by Peter Fischel. In this poem, the author is speaking to a little boy. He draws a picture for us, just like an artist would do, only with words. He describes a sense of helplessness to change the course of pain, of suffering. He is sending an apology to all those who perished and a wish that he could have changed the course. This poem is read by Darby, Thatcher, and Nolan Sheik.
Peter L. Fischel was a survivor of the Holocaust and a poet who dedicated much of his life to educating people about the Holocaust and the importance of acceptance of others. Fischel worked on a project with a sculptor to create a monument to the little Polish boy. During the Holocaust, Fischel hid in a Catholic school in Budapest, Hungary, with 60 other Jewish children. His father was taken by the Nazis and never seen again. Peter Fischel died on February 12, 2018. He was 88 years old.
Little Polish Boy by Peter Fischel. Verse 1. I would like to be an artist, so I can make a painting of you, little Polish boy. Standing with your little hat on your head, the Star of David on your coat, standing in the ghetto with your arms up, as many Nazi machine guns pointed at you. I would make a monument of you and the world, who said nothing. I would like to be a composer, so I could write a concerto of you, little Polish boy. Standing with your little hat on your head, the Star of David on your coat, standing in the ghetto with your arms up, as many Nazi machine guns pointed at you. I would write a concerto of you and the world, who said nothing. Verse 2. I am not an artist, but my mind has painted a painting of you. 10 million miles high is the painting, so the whole universe can see you now, little Polish boy. Standing with your little hat on your head, the Star of David on your coat, standing in the ghetto with your arms up, as many Nazi machine guns pointed at you. And the world, who said nothing. I'll make this painting so bright that it will blind the eyes of the world, who saw nothing. 10 billion miles high will be the monument, so the whole universe can remember you, little Polish boy. Standing with your little hat on your head, the Star of David on your coat.
Standing in the ghetto with your arms up, as many Nazi machine guns pointed at you. And the monument will tremble, so the blind world now will know what fear is in the darkness. The world who said nothing, I am not a composer, but I will write a composition for 5 trillion trumpets, so it will blast the eardrums of this world. The world who heard nothing, I am sorry that it was you and not me.
This is the story of a little girl by the name of Lily Hirsch, and she was from Transylvania. I'll show you a picture of her. That's her at 12 years old, and you'll notice her braids. They had never been cut. Her hair had never been cut in her 12 years, and her mother found out that the Nazis had just taken over the neighboring village and would soon be upon their village, and she knew that they would cut her hair, and so she cut off those braids, and she took them to the neighbor's house next door, who were not Jewish, and she asked them if they would please watch after those braids until the end of the war, which they did. And only Lily and her brother survived the war. They came back and retrieved those braids. Oh, I'm sorry, only Lily's brother, not Lily. And he retrieved those braids. The neighbors did hold on to them. I saw those braids with my own eyes at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem about 15 years ago. My parents took our entire family on a trip to Israel. And it happened to be Holocaust Remembrance Day. And as soon as I saw those braids, I knew I was going to write this song as soon as I got home. The house he was born in was only next door. His country had vanished, his people no more. Out in the garden, some little boys played. They had only come back to retrieve Lily's braids. The neighbors were home to the word they were true. They kept them safe like they said they would do. Despite any orders they might have obeyed, it was righteous of them to have kept Lily's braids. Word had come down, the Germans were near. They had taken a village a few miles from here. There was no place to run, there was no place to hide. It was no longer safe to be going outside. Whispers of horrors, what they did to the Jews, sorting into piles the clothing and shoes. At the railway station, shaving their heads, then taking the hair to make pillows and beds. Lily's hair had never been cut. The curtains were drawn, the doors were shut. It had hung to her knees just moments before. The braids would be safe with the people next door. Lily's mother quietly prayed. She said, "Come here, child, don't be afraid. I promise you one day we'll pin them back on after the war, when the soldiers are gone." The house he was born in was only next door. Lily's brother returned sometime after the war. They were all he had left. How heavy they weighed, though maybe not as much now that he'd retrieved Lily's braids. Maybe not as much now.
Our next reading will be The Orange by Ruth. Ruth's story represents one of the many stories penned by children who were sent away on the Kindertransport to Britain, separated from their families to save their lives. We don't know Ruth's last name, but we hear in her story the fear and the intense desire for normalcy that something as simple as an orange represents. Her story is read by Kathy Handler Eisenberg.
In 1938, all Jews of Polish origin were brought to German police stations and loaded onto trains to Poland. A few months later, Ruth and her sister Sylvia were able to leave Poland for England with the Kindertransport. Ruth died at the age of 18 from an old brain injury thought to have been caused by a bad fall when chased by Nazi youths when she was young. This story is one of her memories preserved by publications from the children of the Kindertransport. The Orange by Ruth. My father was born in Antwerp, Belgium, my mother in Krakow, Poland. They met and married in Germany, where they made a home, and where my sister and I were born. We thought of ourselves as good Germans, but the Nazis never gave us German passports. They considered us Polish. One day, a man from the Gestapo came to our door asking for father. Whenever someone in a Nazi uniform came to the door, we were fearful. "He is not home," my mother told him, her voice trembling. He went to visit his mother in Belgium. 2 days later, Mother received an order to come to the police station with us. We were allowed to bring only a small bag with a few belongings. It was the last time we saw our home. We were pushed onto a train with hundreds of other people. An overnight journey, we had to get out at a small border town between Germany and Poland, and we were very hungry and tired. More and more trains arrived, unloading more and more people. The next morning, we were taken to barracks. We were each given a bowl of thin soup, a piece of stale bread, and straw to sleep on. We had to get water for drinking and washing from a pump. During that time, many got sick and some died. I had my 11th birthday in November while we were in Sebastian. If we had been at home, Mother would have baked a huge birthday cake and decorated it with flowers and candles, one for every year, plus one to grow on. My friends would have come all dressed up in their party clothes, the girls with ribbons in their hair. But there was no birthday celebration in Sebastian. Instead, Mother handed me an orange. I didn't know where she got it. I couldn't believe that she had found precious fruit in this place. I could not bear to eat it or to share it with anyone, so I kept it. Each day I would say to myself, "I'll eat it today." But I didn't. Oranges don't last forever, and finally mine turned rotten and I had to throw it away. I would always remember this very special present. I never saw another orange until I came to England with the Kindertransport.
Our next reading is All But My Life by Gerda Weissman Klein. Gerda's autobiography is powerful and a book that Julie Kinder McMillan has used for many years to teach the Holocaust to 8th graders. In this short excerpt, we see the challenge of parenting during the Holocaust and how it looks through the eyes of a child. They see that the horrendous betrayal of neighbors in the Nazi era runs so deep that a parent's smile is not what it used to be, but an example of courage that must be displayed going forward. I'm Katie Nayed Thames, and I'll be reading this excerpt. Gerda Weissman Klein survived the ghetto, deportation, slave labor camps, and a 3-month death march. She was the sole survivor of her family. All But My Life is her autobiography. This excerpt is from chapter 1 of All But My Life. A big truck with German soldiers was parked across the street. Our neighbors were serving them wine and cakes and screaming as though drunk with joy. "Heil Hitler! Long live the Fuhrer! We thank thee for our liberation." I couldn't understand it. I didn't seem to be able to grasp the reality of what had happened. What are those people doing? The same people I had known all my life. They have betrayed us. Early in the afternoon, the drunken, jubilant mob was still celebrating its liberation. Papa and Mama smiled. Their smiles were more painful to me than my screams and tears. And I learned at that moment that I must not always cry when I wanted. I realized we were outsiders, strangers in our own home. Although I was only 15, I had a strong feeling, more instinct than reason, that our lives were no longer our own, but lay in the hands of a deadly enemy. Early in the evening, when the shouting of the mob had died away, our neighbor, Mrs. Bergman, came over and relayed the news that several Jews had been rounded up in the streets, locked in the temple, and the temple set on fire. We sat a while in silence, and Mama got up outwardly calm and said, "Go to bed, children. We will all need our rest and strength." Her words ended our first day under German rule. Our next reading is from Echoes from the Holocaust. It's an excerpt by Mira Kimmelman. Mira states in her memoir that she wrote her book as a memorial to all who were killed. Her humanity is contrasted with the brutality she experienced. From this excerpt, read by her son Jean and his wife Caroline, we see her compassion for others regardless of the circumstances, and we are reminded of the importance of our inner voice.
Mira first wrote this piece for a writing contest in 1993. Entitled The Watch, it was Mira's first published work and later became a chapter in her first book. She was 17 years old when she and her family were forced into the ghetto, and she was 19 years old when these events took place. The Watch.
First came the shrilling shout, "Du verfluchtes Schwein, you damn swine." Suddenly, I felt a cutting pain on my back, my shoulders, my head. The SS officer caught me as I ran down the stairs of the factory where the SS had taken us. It was October 31, 1942, the day when the liquidation of the Polish Tomaszów ghetto began. A few hundred Jews, mostly young men and women, were taken out of the marching columns as the others from our ghetto walked to the railroad station. We were told we were all being sent east to work. The true destination was Treblinka, the death camp. But at that time, we did not know the truth about Treblinka. We had heard of other ghettos being liquidated, a euphemism really meaning death. Those who lived in the ghetto and worked for the Germans were assured that they and their families would remain in ghettos. However, the families of the Judenrat, the Jewish ghetto police, were told the same thing. Everyone frantically tried to find work in order to protect their families. Quick marriages were performed for people who had jobs and wanted to try to protect their loved ones. My father and brother worked outside the ghetto for the organization TOT, OT, a group that had a fleet of trucks to serve the Germans by moving supplies to the soldiers at the front. I had a job from May until July 1942 at the Army Laundry, when blood-soaked uniforms from the Eastern Front were washed and repaired. But in July, the laundry closed and I was without a job. My mother and I stayed in the ghetto, hoping that my father's job would enable us to remain where we were. A few days before this fateful day, the families of all slave workers for the OT were taken to a safe place, an empty factory on Storlaska Street. Everyone envied us. They thought we were safe. On the night of October 30, the ghetto was surrounded by SS soldiers and by Ukrainian SS guards. Early in the morning, all the men who worked for the OT were permitted to leave. Then about 8 a.m., we heard the dreaded loud knocking at the door. They ordered everyone to assemble outside in 10 minutes. Wear your heavy working shoes, warm clothing, and carry all your valuables. You may need them, we were ordered. Upstairs, my mother and I dressed hurriedly in layers of clothing and ran downstairs. In the rush, I left my wristwatch, a 13th birthday gift from my parents, forgotten as we were confronted by the brutality of the SS. We were marched 5 in a row down Strelowska Street toward the railroad station. From every corner, every street, Jews were marching. Old ones, young ones, mothers and babies, children holding on to parents.
We marched in absolute quiet. Now and then a shot was heard, but we were too scared to look back. As we walked, we saw an SS officer in front of a small white Catholic church surrounded by a graveyard, pointing to people and pulling them out. As we got near him, he pointed to me, ordering me to step out. It happened so quickly, I had no time to turn to my mother, no time to say goodbye. She walked on with the column, and I never saw her again. I must have been taken from the column because of my youth and because of my effort to look strong and braver than I really was. Time passed slowly as we, the selected young Jews, stood for hours in the churchyard. The day was exceptionally warm. The sun was shining, yet this was the darkest day of my life. At evening, we were taken back to the empty factory on Stolarska Street, where my family and I had spent the previous night together. The SS ordered us to stay downstairs. Then I remembered the watch I had left upstairs. I thought, I have to get upstairs and retrieve my watch. I found the chrome-plated Optima and hid it in my clothing. Then came the encounter with the SS officer who caught me on my way back downstairs. Why did I risk my life for a watch? An inner voice told me to get it. Hurting from the whipping, sore from the brutal blows, I could not stop thinking of my family, my mother, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins were gone. Only my father and brother remained. I was so relieved to see them return when the OT workers were escorted back to the factory. Sitting on the cement floor, we grieved for our dear ones. Not knowing their fate, everyone hoped they had been sent to work. A few hours passed until the OT workers, including my father and brother, were ordered to leave the building where they were so they could sleep at their workplace. I felt lost and alone. Suddenly, the front door opened. A drunken Ukrainian SS guard entered. Rifle in hand, he grabbed the kind and gentle Jewish ghetto policeman, a friend of mine named Mietek Hendels. A decent, gentle person, Mietek took the job as a policeman to protect his family. The Ukrainian shouted in his drunken voice, "Give me a watch or I'll shoot him," as he grabbed Mietek but pointed his rifle at us. Not a sound could be heard. I reached for my watch and handed it to the Ukrainian, who released Mietek and left the factory satisfied. Now I knew why I ran upstairs to get my watch. The watch my parents gave me in Danzig in 1936 saved the life of a friend, the life of a kind person.
Our next reading will be How Can I Describe by Sonia Weitz. Holocaust educator and survivor Sonia Weitz has been called a survivor with a poet's eye. Her memoir, I Promised I Would Tell, is her testimony through poetry where she bears witness to the unspeakable. This poem, read by Evelyn Blau, describes the horrors of Auschwitz that Sonia experienced as a child.
Sonia Weitz was born in Krakow, Poland. She was 11 years old when her family and other Polish Jews were herded into ghettos by the Nazis. She was 13 when Nazis took her mother from the ghetto to a death camp. Of the 84 members of her extended family, she and her sister Blanca were the only survivors. How Can I Describe by Sonia Weitz. How can I describe Auschwitz to those who have not been there? Once again, language fails me. People from every part of Nazi-occupied Europe arrived in cattle cars. The trains pulled in at the railway platform in Birkenau. Brutal guards and SS men with vicious dogs forced the prisoners to leave the cars in a great hurry. Insults, swearing screams, endless humiliations assaulted and dulled our senses. Quickly, quickly, move, form 2 lines, men and women separately. The lines passed before SS officers who were conducting the selection, directing to one side those unfit for work, and to the other side, those who still had some life in them for forced labor. Everybody was screaming in anguish. Behind the barbed wire, male inmates added their voices to ours. Desperate to have news of their loved ones, they shouted out the names of parents, children, brothers, and sisters. They did this with every new transport that entered the camp. Their cries of longing and our screams of terror formed a chorus of inhuman sounds that filled the universe. But no one heard those awful sounds except for us. I know this is true because no one answered. We had been abandoned by the world.
Our last reading will be This Will Be Our Reply by Lucas Richmond. Lucas created a work for chorus and orchestra inspired by a speech that Leonard Bernstein gave to the United Jewish Fund 2 days after the assassination of President Kennedy. The speech was titled An Artist's Response to Violence. Lucas led the Oak Ridge Symphony and chorus to perform his symphony in 2019. We were so moved by the words that accompanied it that we asked permission to use the text in our Holocaust Remembrance program in 2019 and bring it back today. The Tikkun Olam text is based on the ancient Hebrew phrase Tikkun Olam, repair the world. Penny Lucan and Becky Charles will conduct the responsive reading.
When we performed this piece that Lucas wrote, we performed it in Oak Ridge. It was one of the few times the Oak Ridge Community Chorus had sung in Hebrew, and many members of the chorus had never sung in Hebrew before. For those of us in the synagogue who sang, it was a thrilling experience. For me, it was like doing Israeli dancing with young Germans who have now embraced our traditions. Music and dancing can help us heal. I'm going to read the Hebrew that we sang, and Becky is going to read the English translation. Azur lanu lehavin, manucha la'asot, neged alimut, manuche la'asot.
Help us to understand. What can we do in the face of violence? What can we do?
Lema'an batenu, lema'an chavarenu, Lema'an hadur haaretz, tikkun olam.
For the sake of our homes, for the sake of our friends, for the sake of our earth, heal the earth, heal the world.
Aleinu letaken et ha'olam. We must repair the world.
Repair the world.
Lema'an imotenu, lema'an avotenu, tikkun olam.
For the sake of our mothers, for the sake of our fathers, heal the world.
Lema'an benotenu, lema'an banenu, alenu letaken et ha'olam.
For the sake of our daughters, for the sake of our sons, we must repair the world.
Lema'an siflenu, lema'an sifchatenu, lema'an ha'aba, tikkun olam.
For the sake of our knowledge, for the sake of our joy, for the sake of our love, heal the world.
Lema'an nishmotenu, lema'an hemshech kiyumenu, alenu letaken et ha'olam, tikkun olam.
For the sake of our souls, for the sake of our future, we must repair the world, heal the world.
We now move to prayers. El Malay Rachamim is a prayer said for the souls of the departed, a plea that the soul be granted proper rest. Jim Bogard, my husband, will chant it in Hebrew and then read it in English.
El Malay Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Hashchina. במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמות כל אחינו בני ישראל, אנשים, נשים וטף שנטבחו ושנחנכו ושנשרפו ושנהרגו. בגן עדן תהי מנוחתם, אנא בעל הרחמים, אז תירם בסתר כנפיך לעולמים. וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם, ונאמר Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the souls of all our brethren, men, women, and children of the house of Israel, who were slaughtered and suffocated and burned to ashes. May their memory endure, inspiring truth and loyalty in our lives. May their souls thus be bound up in the bond of life. May they rest in peace, and let us say, Amen.
Rabbi Rashkovsky will lead us in saying the Mourner's Kaddish for the 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust. Now, due to the limitations of Zoom, you do need to stay muted while you join us in this prayer, and we will display it to the screen.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמא דברה חירותי, וימליך מלכותי, בחיי חון ובימי חון, ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב. שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעלמי עלמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתחדר ויתעלה ויתחלל, שמי דקדושה בריחו, לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמה ויאמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ויאמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו אמן.
Thank you, Rabbi. Our featured speaker tonight is Benno Kimmelman. As mentioned earlier, Benno was named after his mother's brother. I'm grateful to Benno for being with us tonight to talk about an experience that he has not shared before. Since Mira died, Benno and his brother Gene have united with several of us to continue the teachings of the Holocaust and to preserve the legacy of their parents. In a note that I received this week from a friend, it said, quote, "You know that Mira is watching with approval and with deep gratitude, that you are allowing her to finally rest in peace by honoring and keeping alive the memory of those who perished in the Holocaust and those who suffered at the hands of Nazis." End quote. Rest in peace, Mira. It is all of us keeping the memory alive. Benno.
Thank you, Ronnie. Today's Yom HaShoah theme, Through the Eyes of a Child, is not one that I can address directly, but I can share some of what I experienced and learned as a child growing up with parents who did survive the Holocaust. As many of you know, my parents, Max and Mira Kimmelman, were survivors of the Holocaust. They came to this country in 1948. They built a new life in Cincinnati, Ohio, surrounded by others who also survived the Holocaust. In 1964, our family moved to Oak Ridge, and so did Gene and I. And this is where my parents lived and thrived and became active members of a very welcoming community. The question for this evening is, what was it like growing up as a child of survivors? Of course, survivors were all very different people, and so were their stories of survival incredibly different. And so too were their homes. These are some of the things that I recall about my years growing up in our home. I always knew that there was something very different about our home. European accents and foreign languages were the norm, mostly Polish and German. That is what I heard around me or spoken to me for many years. As a child, I never even realized that my parents spoke with accents. For me, they spoke like everyone else. There was a formality to our home, a proper way to speak to our parents, a time for meals, a requirement that we always be on time or seek advance permission to be late, a requirement that we eat what was on our plates. There were really quite a few rules, and there were consequences for not following them. Family for us meant very, very few people. Other children seemed to have many relatives, cousins and aunts and uncles. But we knew that the family was small because many relatives had not survived the war. Jewish holidays and traditions were celebrated and were always important in our family, especially holiday food, and it was always delicious. The refrigerator and the freezer could never be too full, and no food could be wasted. School and work always were emphasized and took priority. Working hard was mandatory, not optional. Achieving success was expected. My parents said very little about their experiences during the Holocaust. I do not think the word Holocaust was a word that we ever used in our home. They spoke of the time before the war and of the time after the war, but they avoided talking about what happened during the war. My brother and I knew the names Buchenwald and Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen and what they represented, but not from reading books, because those were the places that we heard our parents and their friends talking about when they spoke in Polish or German about the war. We heard many stories in Polish and German about people and places from before the war. And we heard some stories of how people miraculously escaped death during the war. So many stories, all about a time that seemed very, very far away. There was a constant bustle of activity in our home, all the time. My father worked very hard, and my mother was busy with an endless list of activities and organizations. Teaching was at the very top of her list, always. There were always plants and flowers in the house or in the yard, and they always thrived. I thought of my home as being some kind of old world experience, certainly not the kind of home that anyone I knew would understand. As I look back, I realized that those were special years for my parents. They were raising a family in a very different world than they had ever experienced. And I was growing up and trying to get out of that home. There were some very valuable lessons that I learned from my parents. Lessons that I think about a lot. They taught us that life is a precious gift, that much can be done with it, but it requires effort and hard work. And they made it a point to celebrate every happy occasion, and they really appreciated all of them. They taught us that family is an anchor that must be cherished, no matter how small and no matter how distant family members might be. My parents, and particularly my mother, always made the effort to write, to call, to reach out. And the result was really very impressive. They kept our small family close, and they drew other family members together to us. For them, friends were very, very important. There were many family friends who spent time in our home. Many meals, many cups of tea and with cake, always cake. It did not matter what language they spoke or where they were from or how they looked or what religion they practiced. What mattered always was what they said and what they did. My parents had many dear friends all over the world. They remained connected to these friends, and amazingly, even to the children of their friends, through letters and cards and telephone calls. We were taught that we had obligations and opportunities to make a difference in other people's lives. Obligations like supporting worthy organizations or causes with time or resources or both. My mother made organizations a passion, and she gave unselfishly of her time and energy to each of them. Opportunities like teaching students or adults Hebrew or preparing them for bar or bat mitzvah. My mother always viewed these as special opportunities. And again, amazingly, she built lasting bonds with her students. We were taught that religious faith can have a very important role in our lives. For my parents, Judaism and the land of Israel had special importance, giving them both strength and meaning. Yom HaShoah, remembering what happened to the Jewish people and to others during the Holocaust, is our duty and obligation. not just to keep the memory of dear ones alive, but also to prevent the horrors of the Holocaust from happening to anyone. In conclusion, there is no real answer why some people survived the Holocaust and others did not. This is and was a question that was asked by survivors so many times and is also asked by their children. Like so many things in life, chance, good fortune, may well be an important factor. But my parents always said that they survived in part because of the goodness of others, strangers who risked their lives to help someone who was in desperate need of help. This is why it is so important to remember, to make sure that we never forget those whose lives were taken, to never forget those who risked their lives for others, and to find the inspiration to do what we can to make sure that the horrors of the past are not repeated in the future.
Thank you so much, Benno, for sharing that. And I'm just so grateful that I have you and Jean in my life. So we're going to end this program with music from Chuck Brodsky on a note of hope, which is what we always do. And when Chuck is finished performing When a Dane Was a Dane, then all of you who have candles should light them. Stay muted, and you can say any appropriate prayers, and we will go out seeing these candles and remembering that behind each candle is someone who will help us repair the world. It has been a privilege to be part of this program. Chuck.
Thank you, Ronnie. It's been a real honor for me to be part of this program, too. You might notice behind me, there's a Danish flag, and it's partly because of the story behind this song. I've spent a lot of time in Denmark over the years, and I love the Danish people. I loved them first before I found out this story. The Danes managed to save all of their Jews that were willing to leave, that were willing to believe that they were in danger. And this was because there was somebody in the government that found out the Nazis were planning on rounding up the Jews and sending 2 big passenger ships to Copenhagen Harbor. On the eve of the high holidays, they were going to round up the Jews. But this person in the government started to spread the word, and people then would go door to door, warning their neighbors. And even though there was no organized effort, people still came together and managed to evacuate all of their Jewish friends. They would take them to little harbor towns along the coast, hide them in places like hospitals or garden sheds, wherever they could, until the evenings came around, and with whatever kind of boats they could muster, they would shuttle the Jewish people over to Sweden, 10 miles across the Öresund Sound. The Swedish government was willing to take them in until the end of the war. But the Danish government said that a Dane is a Dane. There's no distinction. There was no distinction between a Jewish Dane and a non-Jewish Dane. All Danes were Danes. So I wrote this song called A Dane is a Dane.
Gardens were tended, the animals fed, even the blankets were tucked in the beds. Nothing was broken, the walkways were swept, everything looked like it did when they left. The government stepped down, they firmly refused to carry out the order to round up the Jews. A dame was a dame, the law was the law. There'd be no Jewish question in Denmark at all. Sweden was willing to take them all in, till it was safe to go back home again. From the time word of the plan was leaked, they only would have until the end of the week. No organization or chain of command, it was just everybody lending a hand. Schools were closed, work shut down, while the people were moved to little harbor towns. They came for the ones who had already gone to passenger ships that they didn't get on. After spending a week in the harbor waiting, they steamed away from Copenhagen. People were hidden in hospital beds with bandages wrapped around their faces and heads. Some were hidden in homes or in schools or in backyard sheds with the garden tools. Rowboats, fishing boats, dinghies, and yachts took them the 9 or 10 miles across. The German patrols, they hadn't a clue. Right under their noses and back again too. They came for the ones who had already gone to passenger ships that they didn't get on. After spending a week in the harbor waiting, they steamed away from Copenhagen. Crossings were made under cover of night, aiming for those faraway lights. Babies were drugged to keep them asleep. Nobody spoke and nobody breathed. 7,000 people were saved, thanks to their neighbors, decent and brave. And when they got home, their walkways were swept. Everything looked like it did when they left. They came for the ones who had already gone to passenger ships that they didn't get on. After spending a week in the harbor waiting, they steamed away from Copenhagen. They came for the ones who had already gone to passenger ships that they didn't get on. After spending a week in the harbor waiting, they steamed away from Copenhagen.